This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. Almost half a century in prison, $500,000 in fines. That was the sentence handed down today upon television evangelist Jim Baker, convicted of fraud and conspiracy. And so ended a fall from power and high living that began with the revelation of a brief sexual encounter with a young church secretary. CBS News correspondent Bruce Hall was in the courtroom in Charlotte.
Jim Baker knew he was out of miracles and heading to jail when he arrived at the federal courthouse with his daughter, but without wife Tammy Faye. In the hearing, prosecutors asked for a long sentence, calling the television evangelist a liar, a con man who fleeced his followers out of $158 million in a classic pyramid scheme. Judge Robert Potter asked Baker if he had anything to say. Baker stood and said, "I want to say I'm deeply sorry for those I have hurt. I have sinned, but never in my life did I intend to defraud." Judge Potter said top management of PTL was deceitful and untruthful, and Jim Baker was the head man, the man responsible. The sentence, 45 years, $500,000 fine. Baker looked straight ahead, not reacting. His daughter burst into tears. Prosecutors said the message was loud and clear.
That you can't use television and the mails to make fraudulent statements and representations to get people to send money to you.
The now bankrupt and closed PTL Vacation Resort stands as a reminder of the bizarre mushrooming scandal that racked the multi-billion-dollar religious broadcasting industry. At the urging of the prosecutors, Baker was ordered to jail immediately.
We are concerned that he presents a flight risk.
Family members refuse to talk about the severity of the sentence, but Baker's attorneys say they will appeal the conviction and the denial of bail.
He is in as good a spirits as can be under the circumstances. He is, of course, concerned about the length of sentence, as we all are.
Late this afternoon, Jim Baker was taken from the courthouse, handcuffed and shackled, and sent directly to a medium security prison in Talladega, Alabama, to begin serving his sentence. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Charlotte.
Sentencing today in another case that attracted a lot of attention, a judge in Beverly Hills sentenced actress Zsa Zsa Gabor to 3 days in jail and 120 hours of community service for slapping a police officer. The judge said, quote, "If you strike a cop, you go to jail. The law applies equally to everybody," unquote. A jury last month convicted Gabor of striking the policeman, driving without a valid license, and having an open container of alcohol in her car. From Boston tonight, a telling and extraordinary story of violence, death, new life, and how a desperately wounded man led police to the scene. Betsy Aaron reports.
My wife's been shot, I've been shot.
A husband calls 911 from his car phone.
Where are you right now, sir? Can you indicate to me?
No, I don't know. He made us go to an abandoned area. Don't see any signs. Oh, God.
Carol and Charles Stewart had just left a birthing class at Boston's Brigham and Women's Hospital when a gunman forced his way into the car, robbed them of $100 and 2 watches, and then shot them. Carol, with a bullet in her head, was slumped but breathing beside her husband. Stewart, with a bullet in his abdomen, picked up his car phone to call for help.
Is your wife breathing?
Oh, man. Oh.
Hang in there with me, Chuck.
Oh, man, I'm going to pass out.
Chuck.
I'm blanking out.
You can't blank out on me. I need you, man. I need a little better location to find you immediately. Hello, Chuck? Chuck, can you hear me, Chuck?
For 13 minutes, Massachusetts State Police dispatcher Gary McLaughlin kept Chuck Stewart talking.
This is our job. That's what we do every day.
No call had ever been like this one. When Chuck Stewart lost consciousness, his phone was still open. Police were able to locate the car by listening to the sound of their sirens over the phone. Carol Stewart was rushed to Brigham and Women's Hospital, where doctors performed an emergency cesarean section, removing her son. And then she died.
The Stewart family are the latest victims in this senseless tragedy, and its senseless violence generated by the frightening plague of drugs and guns in our society.
Chuck Stewart is in Boston City Hospital in fair condition. He was able to give police a sketchy description of the gunman. There has been no information released on the condition of Chuck Stewart's son. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, Boston.
Let me emphasize that all of that was actual news footage. Still to come on tonight's CBS Evening News, correspondent David Dow on the quake, tough times on the long road to recovery. And Richard Roth on the abortion laws, toughening up in Pennsylvania. $2.85 billion relief plan for Northern California. The bill went to the Senate, which is expected to approve it quickly for signature into law at the White House later this week. California lawmakers argued the money isn't close to being enough. And in the battered earthquake zone today, David Dow reports many of the survivors face a long road back.
The Bay Area struggled toward a semblance of normalcy today, 1 week after the great quake of '89. Once again, the Bay's commuters endured another rush hour without gridlock, as thousands took ferries and trains instead of the crippled Bay Bridge.
San Francisco, we're gonna rise again.
On Nob Hill, they're already singing of a brighter future. But getting there will take time. Time, for instance, to revive tourism, the city's #1 industry. The attractions survived, but the tourists fled. In what is normally their busiest month, many hotels are less than half full.
We are open for business, and that's the message that we need to get around the country and the world.
In the areas hardest hit by the earthquake, some have already received insurance checks, but more than 70% of the victims have no earthquake insurance. They've begun crowding federal assistance centers, while others refuse to give up hope that something can be salvaged, even in the wreckage of a condemned home.
Financially, it's probably not worth doing this. Emotionally, I need to do it.
At least 3,000 of the displaced in the Bay Area remain in shelters. Elva Potter still has her home, but like 5,000 of her Marina neighbors, she has no heat, no hot water, just the still scattered remnants of the earthquake.
Are you going to continue living here?
Oh, indeed. Yes. Yes. Until God wants me, I'll live here.
Meanwhile, in Oakland today, workers took steps toward dismantling a collapsed section of the 880 freeway, a safety measure. The confirmed death toll at the freeway is now 39, with 9 still missing, far fewer than first expected. In nearby El Cerrito, there were funeral services for one of the victims, 27-year-old Taran Fortune, who died a few miles from where she worked among the county's poor. David Dow, CBS News, San Francisco.
Texas rescuers today searched parts of a smoldering Phillips Petroleum Plastics plant where an enormous explosion yesterday killed at least 2 people, injured more than 100 others, and left 22 missing and presumed dead. That blast yesterday hurled debris 5 miles away and shook the ground for 25 miles outside Houston near Pasadena, Texas. Christine Negroni is there.
No cause has been determined for one of the worst industrial accidents in Texas history. So far, only 2 bodies have been found because damage to the plant is so extensive. Recovery of other victims could take as long as a month.
This is probably one of the worst damage type fires that I have witnessed.
We just can't get to certain parts of the plant. They can't get to it. We're going to have to take bulldozers to make roads in.
Plant management says for the time being, it will continue to pay its 900 workers.
With more than 50% of the plant destroyed, the bosses aren't saying how long that will continue. They do suggest that some plant workers may be hired to help with the cleanup.
All they can do is what they are now and try and, take care of the people.
For now, all the plant workers can do is watch from a distance and grieve. Christine Negroni, CBS News, Pasadena, Texas.
A food fight today between the American Heart Association and the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The Heart Association says the USDA has rejected its plans to offer seals of approval for meat and poultry products complying with guidelines for fat, cholesterol, and salt. The Heart Association calls it a cave-in to meat and poultry political lobbyists whose products don't comply with the Heart Association guidelines. For its part, the USDA insists the Heart Association's proposed labels are misleading. German parliament formally elected the country's new communist president today, and he immediately called for an end to the pro-democracy demonstrations that have filled the streets for 5 weeks. The new president got polite applause from the parliament and a roar of defiance from the street. Beginning our report tonight on the changing face of communism, correspondent Alan Pizzi is on the scene in East Germany.
What should have been a day of triumph for new East German leader Egon Krenz turned into a day of humiliation. Nearly 15,000 demonstrators took over the streets of East Berlin and taunted their new president with the chant of "Krenz, Krenz, we are your competition." While police watched impassively, the protesters sat down in front of Parliament and chanted, "People's Assembly, what a disaster." They weren't the only dissenters of the day. For the first time in the history of East Germany's normally rubber-stamp parliament, unanimity didn't carry the day. 26 of the 500 members voted against Krenz, and another 26 abstained. It was so surprising that the speaker had to count twice. In his 40-minute acceptance speech, Krenz warned that the streets were not the place to demand reform. He called for dialogue, but made no mention of the unofficial opposition. His idea of meeting the people was a Gorbachev-style plunge into what seasoned East German watchers called an old guard rent-a-crowd. The opposition that has filled the streets of cities across East Germany covers a broad spectrum of society. So far, it isn't a unified movement, and demonstrators often seem surprised that they are getting away with it. The police, too, are no longer sure how to react. Tonight's demonstration seemed to take them completely by surprise. The demonstrators don't expect Egon Krenz to step down just because they don't like him. But as one reform leader put it, after 40 years of repression, change has started, and there's no way his government can stop it. Alan Pizzi, CBS News, East Berlin.
The world is still trying to sort out the implications of all that Soviet Foreign Minister Shevardnadze said yesterday. In a stunningly candid speech to the Soviet parliament, Shevardnadze, among other things, called the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan immoral and illegal. He admitted that Moscow broke an arms control agreement with the United States by building that big radar complex in Siberia, and he held out the prospect that by the year 2000, the Soviet Union will close all its foreign military bases and draw back within its own borders. Joining us now is our CBS News consultant on Soviet affairs, Professor Stephen Cohen of Princeton. Steve, what are we to make of a Soviet foreign minister who denounces the Kremlin's own foreign policy? What's going on here?
Talk about the changing face of communism. We saw it vividly. I can't myself think of a comparable occasion when the top leadership of the country, and after all, Mr. Gorbachev was sitting there right next to Mr. Shevardnadze, said to the whole nation on national television, we committed criminal acts in Afghanistan and violated treaties. I think he had 3 audiences. He was telling the Soviet people, never again a war, 13,000 dead, billions of rubles. Then he spoke to this new Soviet legislature, and he said, we're serious. Take some charge of Soviet foreign policy. Play your role. And finally, he was talking to us. He was talking to the American government. He was saying, look, you may have doubts, but hear this. You're dealing with different Soviet rulers today. We are not the old group. We are new. Look what we're saying. Let's get going. Let's do something in arms control. We're ready.
Now, Shevardnadze also held out the possibility, yea, the probability of a whole different kind of Soviet Union in a different world. Realistically, what's the probability of that coming to pass?
What does realistic mean with Mr. Gorbachev anymore? I mean, we used to know what realism was in world affairs, but we have a Soviet leader as bold as we, I think, have ever seen, and a man who seems to be some kind of dreamer. He dreams new dreams. I think he's saying, match me in boldness and we'll create a new world. And after all, only yesterday, Secretary of State Baker himself gave a fairly bold speech, indicating that the Bush administration is now ready to reach out and seize this opportunity. So I don't think we can rule out a dream now.
Very quickly, Gorbachev is due to go to Finland tomorrow. What should we be looking for?
Well, it will be interesting. We don't know, but it would be interesting and not unlikely if he points to the Soviet-Finnish relationship as a kind of model for the new Soviet-East European relationship. After all, Finland's been an independent country. It stayed within the sort of Soviet foreign policy loop, but otherwise it's gone its own way. And I think, in a way, that's what Gorbachev is holding out for Eastern Europe.
Steve Cohen, thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Soviet legislators made another push for more democracy today. The Supreme Soviet voted to abolish an election law that gives the Communist Party 100 guaranteed seats in the Soviet Congress. That means Mikhail Gorbachev and other top party officials would have to run for office in openly contested races. Pro-Iranian kidnappers in Beirut revived an old demand today, calling for the release of 15 Shiite Muslim terrorists long jailed in Kuwait for bombing the U.S. and French embassies. Kuwait has repeatedly flatly refused to consider any such demand. The message was accompanied by a photograph of Terry Anderson, the longest held of 8 American hostages. It appeared similar to a picture released a year ago. A journalist, Anderson will be 42 years old Friday. It will be his 5th birthday in captivity.
Take my word for it, this is utopia. Am I talking about scenery, harp music, the betterment of man? No, I'm talking burgers. I had the most perfect hamburger in my life here. It was so juicy and delicious, thought I was in heaven, so to speak. Utopia does exist.
No cleaning power against so many tough stains. Now, that's cleaner. No fooling around. Relight, it's serious cleaning. If you're up to here with thick, liquid fiber laxatives, ask your doctor or pharmacist about FiberCon. Get all the natural action of fiber to help you be regular in easy-to-swallow tablets. FiberCon, your choice is clear.
It was Pennsylvania's turn today in the latest week-to-week, state-by-state battle over abortion policy, following highly publicized attempts and failures to get stricter state abortion laws on the books in Florida and Illinois. A different outcome shaping up tonight in heavily Catholic Pennsylvania. CBS News correspondent Richard Roth is there.
It took the House 2 hours today to consider whether Pennsylvania would become the first state to toughen abortion laws since the Supreme Court opened the way to new restrictions last July. But it wasn't so much a debate as a reprise of well-known views on an issue of bitter divisions.
Abortion is, in fact, the killing of an unborn child.
Imagine a state without safe and legal abortion. Imagine the pain and suffering that would cause thousands of women and their families in the years ahead.
One lawmaker said listening will change people's minds, but it did not. The legislature voted 143 to 58 to make one of the strictest abortion laws in the nation even stricter. It's virtually the same way Pennsylvania has voted each time the issues come up over the past decade. Today's measure, which the governor has said he'll sign, tightens the law this way. It outlaws abortions after 24 weeks unless a woman faces serious permanent injury. It imposes a 24-hour waiting period after pre-abortion counseling, requires the husband be notified, and bans abortions for the purpose of selecting a baby's sex.
The provisions go on, and it simply is really a bill of horribles.
Not so, said the majority here. This was a legitimate and moderate state action. But once it becomes law, it's also bound to become a federal case, certain to be challenged up to the Supreme Court. Both sides agree the abortion battle isn't ending within a single state. It's just being renewed nationwide. Richard Roth, CBS News, Harrisburg.
Pre-trial rulings today in the Weapons for Iran big money criminal case against John Poindexter. Poindexter, an admiral, won political appointment as National Security Advisor to former President Reagan. The judge in his case now says he will allow Poindexter's defense lawyers to subpoena documents, diaries, and notes from former President Reagan, but not any similar records kept by President George Bush. The judge's reason, Poindexter had met daily and privately with Mr. Reagan on subjects relevant to the charges, but Poindexter said the judge couldn't demonstrate he did so with Mr. Bush, who was then vice president. An economic slowdown ahead. That was the prediction from analysts after the government today said that orders for so-called durable goods slipped 0.1% in September. But excluding the defense sector, the drop was far sharper, down 3.9%. That's the steepest decline in 3 months.
To the average car, this could be a dangerous body of water, even though it's only an inch deep. That's why you should drive the new four-wheel drive Subaru Legacy, the latest in foul weather gear.
Doctors measure back pain